Burnice has been out for a few days now, so I wanted to talk about my thoughts on her, how she feels, and if she's worth pulling. To limit my yapping, I'm not going to break down Burnice's kit here, and I'm assuming you already know how she works. Let's get the big questions out of the way. Do I think Burnice is worth pulling? If you're interested in playing disorder teams, absolutely. Burnice's ability to build a substantial amount of fire anomaly from off-field, and her ability to trigger burn from off-field, makes her the current best anomaly partner for any disorder team that's currently in the game. And right now, Burnice is the only character capable of really filling this role. Is she a must-pull for disorder teams, though? No, I don't think any character in this game will ever be a must-pull. The content in this game isn't difficult enough to require needing specific characters. I'm sure that we're going to get more characters who can apply and trigger attribute anomalies from off-field in the future too, but unless Hoyo decides to make another fire character that does Burnice's job but better, you could still find use for her even when that does happen. If you're not interested in Disorder, but you really like Burnice, you can still use her in fire-focused teams if that's something you're interested in. I've tried on-field carry Burnice, and it still clears content very well, even if I personally wouldn't recommend it, since her Disorder teams perform better. If you're not interested in Disorder teams and you don't like Burnice, why did you click on this video? You probably want to skip her in that case. And the other big question, is her W engine worth pulling? Maybe if you really like her. I'm generally not a weapon puller, I think characters are more fun, so there's some bias there, but with that said, I did pull for Burnice's W engine because I love her. While her signature is her best option, the calcs on Pride One have the gap between it and her next best option as being smaller than a character like Jane or Ellen would see from their signatures. From what I can tell, these calcs don't account for the extra energy regen that her sig provides her when she's off-field, so there's definitely a comfort aspect that isn't fully shown there. However, in my testing without her signature, her energy regen was never an issue that I ran into, so it's definitely not necessary by any means. The clip that you've been seeing now has Burnice on a Starlight engine, which is an attack engine, and she felt completely fine using that, and that's the equivalent of using a Weeping Gemini with 0 stacks, so literally any anomaly option would have better results here. If you're not a big Burnice simp like I am, I'd take a trip to the gadget store and max out a Weeping Gemini and run her on that. But if you love Burnice and you want to max out her performance, her W engine isn't bad. I'll briefly cover some team thoughts here before we dive into a bunch of gameplay. If you play Piper, I think Burnice makes Piper's team substantially stronger, and I think she's Piper's best teammate. I've become something of a Piper main recently, so I'll have a lot of Piper thoughts that I'll dive into later. I don't have Grace or Jane, so I can't comment too much on them. From what I've seen from others though, Burnice, Grace, and Rina seems like a very solid Disorder team, although it did look like her assault-focused teams with either Jane or Piper performed better. For Jane, it looks like Burnice, Jane, and either Caesar, Seth, or Lucy all perform extremely well, and I do think that Burnice is an upgrade for her. However, Jane is already a character that performs extremely well in hypercarry assault-focused teams, so whether or not you feel Burnice is worth picking up for a minor improvement is really up to you. I've played a good amount of Jane, Caesar, and Seth on a friend's account, and that team and other hypercarry variations all feel very solid. If you don't think you'd like how Jane feels in a Disorder team, you can just stick with her hypercarry options and you shouldn't be missing out. Burnice feels like more of a fun factor pull there. When it comes to Yanagi, our Electric Anomaly S rank coming next patch, I'll talk about her leaks a bit towards the end of this video. With those main thoughts out of the way, let's dive into some gameplay. I recorded a bunch of Shiyu Defense 7 clears with a few different Burnice and Piper teams, so I'll show the best of these now, and then I'll add some additional thoughts about Burnice and about Piper teams afterwards. Captions will be on screen to break down and explain some of the important parts of these clears. Also, before we get started, I wanted to shout out Ando. I've learned a good amount of Piper tips from watching their content, and I also picked up the grouping for the first wave of this Shiyu defense, which you're going to see in every single clear in this video from them. There's a link to their Burnice Day 1 clears in a card now, and it's also in the description alongside anything else that I referenced during this video. Definitely check them out. Now, enjoy the gameplay. Now I'm going to touch on some additional thoughts. Let's start with talking about Burnice's playstyle and her build. One thing I do want to bring up, which you've probably seen through this gameplay, is that I do spend a good amount of time on field on Burnice. In my pre-release video, I specifically avoided referring to Burnice as an off-field character and instead said that she had a presence off-field. While her Anomaly buildup from her Afterburn does help a lot, she is also able to apply a lot of Fire Anomaly during her field time with her EX special. There are many situations where it is still worthwhile to devote field time to her and use her EX special even when you're capped out on heat, just to help her trigger a burn and a disorder more quickly. So I do think that thinking of her as strictly an off-field character and only using her EX special to refill her heat before switching her back off-field is not the ideal way of playing her. I think one big point of contention is whether Burnice should be built on an attack percent slot 6 or an anomaly mastery slot 6. For the teams that I've tried, both felt viable, and either one can end up being better depending on the content that you're in, the teammates that you have, and your team's total damage output. I prefer using Anomaly Mastery when running Burnice with Lucy, but with either Caesar or Rina, then attack percent felt better to me. With Lucy specifically, her ability to help build Fire Anomaly quicker made a difference in terms of getting an extra burnout within a reasonable amount of time when using an AM slot 6, but without that, the time that it took to get an additional burnout felt unreasonable, and it was better to sacrifice that and have more damage on the burns that I could trigger. In general, if you can kill within the same amount of burns, then AM as a slot 6 performs better since you can get those burns off quicker, but if attack percent lets you trigger one less burn to kill, then it ends up performing better. I'd recommend trying both of them out and see what you end up preferring with the teams that you're using, or just go for whatever has the better substats. Now let's talk more specifically about Piper teams. I've almost exclusively played Burnice and Piper teams, and I've really enjoyed them all so far. As I mentioned earlier, I think Burnice is Piper's current best teammate. All of the Piper and Burnice teams that I tried felt more fun to play and cleared faster than the Piper, Caesar, Lucy team that I was running beforehand. The extra damage that you gain from triggering disorders with Burnice, and the ability to front-load Burnice's burn damage by triggering disorders with Piper, really helps to compensate for the lower personal damage output that Piper has as a result of her being an A rank. When it comes to a stronger assault-focused character like Jane, I think the gap that you feel when comparing teams with or without Burnice is much larger on Piper's end than it is on Jane's. All of the Piper teams that I did try can just replace Piper with Jane, and they should all perform better, but Piper is an extremely solid option as an assault character when paired with Burnice. When it comes to the third slot in this team, I tried Caesar, Rina, and Lucy. Let's talk about Lucy first. Out of these three characters, I think Lucy is the best option for Piper teams especially, but only if you have her signature W engine and her M6. I think her performance probably falls off by quite a bit without either of those, with her M6 being particularly impactful. In my pre-release video, I had a lot of positive things to say about Lucy and wanted to highlight her as a viable and strong alternative to Caesar, but after playing these teams a good amount, I would argue that Lucy is just a better option overall. The fact that Lucy's attack buffs apply to the full team makes them feel extremely valuable. Both Piper and Burnice also have the ability to trigger Lucy's M6 multiple times using their EX specials, which allows Lucy to do a substantial amount of additional damage, and also allows her to build Fire Anomaly from off-field to help trigger burns even faster. There is a trade-off here where the more that Lucy contributes to a burn, the lower its damage ends up being compared to a burn that was built solely by Burnice, but the increased frequency of burns outweighs that in my opinion. Having Lucy in this team also gives you the option of using her ultimate instead of Burnice's, and this can be an extremely helpful resource to have in order to give Piper an additional 20 energy. And on the topic of increased burn frequency, let's talk about Freedom Blues. In both the Lucy team clears that I've shown in this video, I was using Freedom Bluesy. Azure98 left a comment on my pre-release video that I'll highlight here, and brought up the question of how a 4-piece Freedom Blues set compares to Protopunk and Swing Jazz on her. I didn't end up trying to run my Lucy on Protopunk since I generally don't like going for defensive assists on non-Caesar teams when trying to clear quickly. I normally end up finding that the DA animation ends up just taking longer than it's worth, but I did compare Freedom Blues to Swing Jazz, and my Freedom Blues clears were faster overall. In this specific context, the extra damage from Swing Jazz didn't end up making a difference in the total number of anomalies that I needed to trigger in order to kill, so having Freedom Blues to get those burns triggered faster ended up making more sense. I do think Swing Jazz struggles a bit on her in these teams, especially if you prefer using Burnice's ultimate, since then you're only getting that buff uptime off of her chain attack, and if you can kill within one stun window, then that's not that impactful. Freedom Blues, on the other hand, even when not having the full uptime throughout the fight, had a noticeable improvement in the time that it took to build burn, and it sped up the rate that I was able to trigger Disorder, which felt much more comfortable to me. Honestly though, I wouldn't worry about adjusting your Lucy build if you already have her on something solid. It's not a huge deal either way, and you'll probably get more out of building discs on other characters anyways. As a whole, I really enjoy Lucy as a partner, and currently the Burnice Lucy Piper team has been my best performing and most fun team to play since the game's release. Enough with the Lucy glazing, let's talk a little bit about Caesar now. Caesar's offensive buffs do suffer a bit since her attack buff is only applied to the active character that's on field, which ends up weakening Burnice's afterburn damage and the portion of Fire Anomaly that she applies from off field, but the buff does apply to Burnice's EX specials and to all of your field time on your other Anomaly character, and the damage percent debuff that Caesar applies does apply to all of your damage as well. One of Caesar's biggest strengths in this team is that her shield can provide an additional level of comfort. Both Piper and Burnice already get interruption resistance and damage reductions during their EX specials, but the interruption resistance that Caesar's shield provides can be nice outside of those moments, and not having to worry about your health as much can be nice too. The other big positive is Caesar's Daze application and her ability to stun enemies quickly, which can be nice as well. In a team like this, you aren't running a stun character, so having a character that can actually help you to stun enemies quickly, especially for enemies where having a long stun window is impactful, so enemies that are particularly mobile like Jane, it can be really nice. Rina is the only other character that I tried in these teams, and she felt fine, but I enjoyed her the least. My Rina is at M1, and I feel like that makes her a substantially better teammate since it makes her buff's duration much more easy to manage. Rina's pen ratio buff does apply to off-field party members as well, which is great, although the 30% increase from her M1 only applies to the on-field character, and that portion isn't really a huge deal. With her M1, you can pretty much just put Rina in once and attack to refresh her buffs when you're in between swapping from your on-field Anomaly character and Burnice, and this should keep her buff time up close to 100% of the time. Without her M1 though, I think that effectively managing Rina's buff up time becomes much more cumbersome, and even with her M1, she did feel less effective than both Caesar and Lucy, and this ended up showing in the clear times as well. However, my Rina build is definitely weaker than both my Lucy and Caesar, and I haven't invested too much into my Rina, so that's also contributing to it as well. In teams where her extra shock duration that she gets from her additional ability does end up mattering, like when she's with Grace or potentially Yanagi, then she'll probably end up feeling more useful. In a Piper team though, her buff does feel about equal to the attack buffs that Lucy and Caesar provide, but both of those characters have other benefits that make their teams feel better to play. Finally, let's talk a very tiny bit about Yanagi based on our current leaks. These are heavily subject to change, so my thoughts on these are going to be more vague, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them yet. If you don't care for leaks, feel free to skip this section using the timestamp in the description. I'll give you 3 seconds to do so. Okay, let's go. Based on the most recent leaks for Yanagi, she's looking like a disorder-focused Anomaly carry, and as a result, she should work very well with Burnice. Her core passive adds 400% to the damage multiplier of Disorder, so she's a character that will want to trigger Disorder as often as possible. And since Burnice is basically the only character that can build and trigger anomalies from off-field, this makes her a great match for Yanagi. In a team with Burnice and Yanagi, Disorder will also front-load any damage from burn and shock that's on the enemy, which helps to speed up that damage output as well. If you use Yanagi's EX special on an enemy that is currently suffering from an anomaly, she also triggers a special mechanic called Polarity Disorder, which deals 25% of the damage that a normal Disorder would do, plus a portion of her Anomaly proficiency, and it counts as Disorder damage. This means that she has her own built-in way of triggering mini Disorders on enemies, which should still help her to perform well in teams without Burnice, or in non-Disorder focused teams, but Burnice is looking to be her best partner. If you're planning to pull Burnice specifically to play her with Yanagi, I would recommend waiting until closer to the ends of Burnice's banner, just so that you can have a clearer picture of what Yanagi's final kit will end up looking like. This will also let you see more gameplay of her, and it should help let you decide if you'll actually like her playstyle as well. Early access videos for Yanagi should start coming out during the last week of Burnice's banner, so you'd still have time to make a decision, and you'd have much more concrete information to aid you in doing so. If you want a much more in-depth take on Yanagi, you can check out JStern25's updated Yanagi video by clicking the card on screen now, and I'll have both of his Yanagi videos in the description as well. And that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video or found any of it helpful, please leave a like. It lets me know that people enjoy this style of content, and it also helps the channel out as a whole. I tried to keep this video more concise and to the point after some feedback on the pre-release, so hopefully this flowed a bit nicer. Let me know in the comments if you've been enjoying Burnice, if you did pull for her, or if you're skipping her, let me know why. Or if there's anything that I didn't cover that you want to know my thoughts on, let me know too. I read everything and I respond to most things, and I love talking about Burnice. I also just wanted to say thank you to everyone for your support of this channel and the recent videos. I really appreciate it, and it's been a great time getting to engage with other ZZZ players. Thank you for watching.